A Simplex converted to a Great Western Railway Prairie tank, part 21. It's not how you start, it's how you finish. And before I start, I'm having a quick look at the best way to make the superheater. But that's not what this episode is about. This is the steam dome. And at the moment I think it looks like a World War II German helmet. It's very flat on the top. And the only way to put this right is to remachine it to make it rounder at the top part. These cast steam domes are quite difficult to make because you can only machine part of it. The bottom bit is 100% handwork. It's very labour intensive and it takes quite a long while to do. This is what the steam dome looks like on top of the boiler. As you can see, it's very flat topped. Over now to the lathe, and I have a piece of metal in the lathe that I need to turn down considerably to support the inner part of the steam dome. This is going to take quite a long while, so what I'm going to do very shortly is speed up the sequence so it doesn't seem to take an eternity. I have to turn down this piece of metal so that the steam dome fits on it like this. Then I can machine away quite a lot of this bit. I used this piece of steel because I found it in my scrap box, and the good thing about it is I can fit it in the chuck jaws without changing the jaws for the external ones, because at some time in the past it's been machined at the other side. I don't really need to face the piece of metal in the chuck, but I thought I would do just for the video. This is a very hard piece of steel and it's taking some cutting, but the surface finish is quite good. It's typical, when I don't need the surface finish to be good, it is, and sometimes on the final cut I don't get a good finish and have to use emery cloth to make it look good. Such is life. Life can be very strange. I think while this is happening, because it's going to take quite a while, I'm going to tell you a story. You have to listen carefully to the details in this story. It's a bit long-winded, but it has a really tragic ending. It haunts me to this day. I'll pause the story for a moment because the lathe is slowing down. The main belt to the headstock is slipping, so I squirted some of this stuff at the belt, and after the solvent evaporated, it didn't slip quite so badly. Back to the story. This is a really sad story. Many years ago, when I was a 19-year-old musician, working on a holiday camp down in Dorset, at the beginning of the summer season, the entertainments manager asked if I would be so kind as to take one of the bluecoats into Portsmouth to get her uniform. The girl was quite good looking and she had extremely long hair. So in due course we arrived in Portsmouth, she picked up the uniform and came back to the car. And she said to me, did I want to go for a coffee? Well, I don't really like coffee, so I said, no, we'll get back to the camp. The real reason for wanting to get back to the camp though was to do some modifications on my Hammond organ, which in those days I was extremely obsessed with and couldn't wait to get into the bar where we worked to take the back off it and modify various parts of it. That's part one of the story. During this summer season, after I split up with my girlfriend who went back up north, I spent quite a lot of time chasing after this really nice blonde girl, all to no avail. That's another story and it's not worth mentioning. Finally, the piece of metal was the correct diameter to accept the steam dome, which was just a push fit on the piece of metal held in place by a live centre in the hole at the top of the dome. The first thing I did was to try a file on it, just to make sure it wasn't full of body filler. And thankfully it wasn't. Now I'm being very careful, and by turning both the saddle handle and the handle on the cross slide at the same time, I'm removing metal so that the dome becomes rounded at the top, not flat. Back to the story. The Bluecoats were a very good team this particular year at Pontin's holiday camp in Dorset, and one of the female members of the team was possibly the best looking woman I've ever seen in my life. She resembled Kelly LeBrock in the film Weird Science. So good looking in fact that none of the male staff on the holiday camp went anywhere near her, including me. It would have been auto-rejection. I had to be satisfied with just watching her walk about. What a beautiful woman she was. I do remember having a very pleasant evening with her chalet mate, just a one-off. After turning and filing and turning, you will see that I keep testing the finish with my finger. In this clip, I'm removing some of the flatness from the top of the dome. This particular summer season was intense. We worked 7 nights and 6 lunchtimes. and after the lunchtime sessions on stage, I would take a shortcut through the small cinema on the holiday camp. There was no one in there, it was always empty during the day. But very frequently this really beautiful woman would be coming down the same aisle going in the opposite direction, and we pushed past each other and said hello, etc., etc. She really had a very nice personality. As you can see by this clip, after more filing and more turning, the dome is starting to appear fairly round, although there are one or two lines in it. It's quite difficult to move the tools in synchronicity manually. So, as I was saying, none of the male staff dare go near this woman for fear of rejection. She was so beautiful. She did have a boyfriend, however, and he would arrive on the holiday camp in a Porsche, take her out and bring her back. I really couldn't compete with this in any way. All I had was a very rusty 1969 Ford Transit. After plenty of filing and sanding using 100 grit sandpaper, it started to look good. All of the lines were disappearing fast. I need to remove the rest of the paint, which really is well baked on. Don't forget the steam dome sits right on top of the boiler. So once again I'm using some 100 grit emery cloth, which seems to remove most of the paint okay. Some of the paint was very stubborn around the flange. I'll remove this manually with some emery cloth on the bench. At this stage of the proceedings, it's a good idea to start polishing up the steam dome to get some idea of how good it is. I never wear gloves in the workshop. I like to know where my fingers are at all times. This is a bit of a problem because the part is getting very hot, but because I do a lot of this stuff these days, my fingertips are getting fairly impervious to heat up to a certain temperature. Plus, just behind the polishing spindle, I do have a tub of water, and very frequently I dip the part into the water to keep it cool. Some of this paint's been very stubborn, so I'm using cellulose thinners and a brass wire brush. I've also put the chimney in the same thinners to remove the paint from that. I'll leave that overnight. The 7 nights and 6 lunchtimes summer season down in Dorset finally came to an end in early September, and on the last day into the next day, all of the staff was sat in the bar having a drink, except for me, because in those days I didn't drink alcohol. Not for religious reasons or anything like that, I just needed to keep a clear head to allow me to do the job, which was very demanding. And in the early hours of the morning, the girl with the very long hair from the beginning of this story came up and said, "Well, I'd just like to say goodbye." Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" and proceeded to say, "Are you gay?" I was so shocked by this I nearly choked on my orange juice and said, "No, not at all." Then she said, "What was wrong, didn't you like me?" And I said, "I don't know what you mean. When you drove me into Portsmouth at the beginning of the season to get my uniform, I gave you every sign in the book that I wanted to get together with you, but you just said, 'Oh no, we'd better get back to the camp. I need to work on my Hammond organ to make it sound better.'" In this clip I'm finishing off the gunmetal dome with some Brasso wadding, and it's really starting to shine. She gave me a hug and bid me goodbye, and as I watched her walk away forever, with the beautiful long hair almost down to her waist, I thought of what could have been, and I really did feel quite shocked and sad about this, but it gets better, or worse. Then the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, who looked like Kelly LeBrock from the film Weird Science, came up to say goodbye. Here's a shot of the steam dome as it was with the flat top before I started working on it. Her words went something like this: "Is there something wrong with me?" At first I didn't understand what she meant. I said, "No, of course not." And here's the tragic part. I can hear her words like they were spoken yesterday. She said, "I really tried, you know. You spent the evening with my chalet mate." Then she said to me, "I even used to wait each lunchtime just outside the cinema exit and then go through the cinema going down the same aisle as you. Why do you think I did that?" At this point I was really speechless, and to this day, 46 years later, as I'm telling the story, it's like reliving the horror of missed opportunities. It's not all bad though. Now I build and repair steam engines. And furthermore, the steam dome on this Simplex Great Western Railway conversion looks a lot better. And that's it for this episode, sad as it may be. Stay safe, stay well, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my main Steam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.